But we've learned a lot about Louise tonight. We've learned that she grew up in the South, moved to the East, dabbled in communism, and then she came, you know, from behind the loom to in front of the stage. Our schizophrenic act, please welcome back Louise Halsey.
Thank you so much. I had quite a bit of time backstage to review my first part that I presented, and I remembered all the pieces that I left out that made the puzzle that I presented to you probably more puzzling than I meant. But that's the past, and we're moving on to the present, and this is not a continuation of that. This is something altogether different. Costume change. So, bienvenidos a todos los hispanohablantes. Para las personas que no hablan español, voy a dejarles pensar que soy hablante nativa y todo el mundo entiende mis palabras. Me voy a México en 2 semanas con mi esposo y su gemelo y la bella esposa de su gemela. Necesito practicar mi español. Pensaba que hacer todo esto en frente del público sin haber bebido cerveza u tequila me iba a dar valor. Aprender otra lengua requiere valor. Saludos a todos que hablan más que una lengua. And that, my dears, is 30 years of Spanish 1 with a little assist from a daughter who's actually fluent. I did that because I am actually going to Mexico, and why not practice your Spanish in front of, you know, such a nice audience as this? And for those who don't speak Spanish, well, I was basically saying you ought to speak at least 2 languages. And that, I think, is true of most of the world. And I really respect that. I mean, to learn to speak English. And I admire that. I was in Ecuador several summers ago, and I was valiantly trying to practice my Spanish, and every Ecuadorian I met was working harder to practice their English. It was quite frustrating. So I'm really, this little bit I'm going to do is bits and pieces that sort of piss me off. So one of the things is the English only movement, which I just think is really ridiculous. I mean, where did they think English came from? Actually, it came from England, as Spanish came from Spain and Portuguese came from Portugal. Those were the languages of the conquistadors, the language of conquest. I mean, not to insult the Native Americans, but that they came over on a land bridge from Asia. So if the truth should be told and you want to speak the language of the North American continent, you should be speaking bison only. So that pisses me off. Something else, well, there's so much. I said I wouldn't get into it, but anyway, I'll touch on a few things. So I do try to follow certain dictums that seem to be appropriate for our time, and I do try to eat locally. I have a little vegetable garden in Little Rock where we have an apartment, and I have a big vegetable garden in the suburbs of Oark, Arkansas, where I have my farm. And but you know, my garden doesn't produce avocados or olives or baking soda. I mean, I do have to go to the grocery store. So I'm very sympathetic. Where I live in Little Rock is it's not unlike the neighborhood I grew up in. And actually, I think there is a whorehouse across the street right now. But anyway, it's a part of town that has, you know, people of color, people without money, and not everybody can go long distances to buy their food. And I think Whole Foods probably did the demographics, and they didn't choose to open a store in my neighborhood. So I have to go hell and gone out there to shop for that kind of food. So in my neighborhood, I have a block away a Save-A-Lot. And I have gone there. I do save a lot. There's nothing there I want to buy. few more blocks over, there's a grocery store that is kind of my local grocery store, and I enjoy going there. It is titled Food Giant, and in smaller letters it says The Meat People. And if you go in there, they have an incredible selection of meat, all kinds of parts of animals. Oh my God, Christy would be very upset. But anyway, might end up in her song. But it's a nice enough store, and when I've complained, I've only been in Little Rock a couple of years, and when I've complained to people who have been in the neighborhood longer, they're like, Louise, this is ridiculous. It's so much better than the store we had before. So I was in there one day, and I was cruising up and down the baking and flour aisle because I was actually looking for whole wheat flour, and I couldn't find any whole wheat flour, and I thought, well, maybe there's a section I don't know about. You know, you can learn something new every day. So the guy was stocking the shelves, and I said to him, do you have whole wheat flour? And he looked a little puzzled, and he said, I think it's in the Mexican section. I thought, well, see, there you go. So we went over to the Mexican section, and he pointed out the masa harina. So it turned out it was his day to learn something new. So it's that sort of situation at the store, but I'm sympathetic. If that was the only place I shopped, I think Food Giant would sort of become descriptive of who I was. So I don't blame people who have, you know, challenges finding healthy food. We actually have structured society, so it's nearly impossible to do. Plus, I'm not into blaming people anyway. That's terrible, terrible behavior. I'm not losing my train of thought or anything here. Okay, so I do want to say that I'm not just a talking head. I'm an actual physical body, and I know in these times, believing in the laws of the universe or science or even basic, you know, structural things like gravity, that's up for question. Since the midterm elections, I mean, we're all into magical thinking or unmagical thinking, or I don't know what you call that. Anyway, as I age, I'm more and more impressed by gravity, for instance. It really, really does have an influence on the human body, and over time it has more and more of an influence. And so I wanted to introduce a little physical activity into my presentation, which is why I brought the yoga mat. So in order to in order to restore the balance, I'm always this way, so I want to show you what I do in order to restore the balance. How could I forget that? And I'll start with, I think this is everybody's favorite yoga pose is dead man's pose or corpse, and then their next favorite is child's pose, which is understandable. This is the balance part. Yeah. Yeah. I can do that. So I have to say, it's not exactly the Chinese acrobats, but that is one way of restoring the balance. And mentioning gravity, I do have some concerns because I didn't choose to study science very much when I was growing up, but I think science education is in trouble. Well, education's in trouble. And I read it recently, that science testing was done to fourth graders in New York City. And I read the results, and I don't know if New York City fourth graders are better or worse or whatever their situation is, but anyway, here's what they found out. Those fourth graders did understand the relationship between the sun and the Earth's crust. They did understand habitat loss and its relationship to species. They didn't understand the phases of the moon or how to read a temperature chart. I thought Al Gore would just go nuts over that one. Or the difference between natural and man-made materials. I thought the goddess would go nuts over that one. So I like to listen to NPR, an addiction I think I'm going to have to get over. And I listened to Science Friday, and I thought, well, if they'd only not eliminate NPR and let those fourth graders listen to Science Friday, they'd do a heck of a lot better on their testing. But that's probably not going to happen. One of the situations that I find myself in when I'm aware of people who don't seem to observe gravity is when I go into the ladies' room. And often when I enter, I look around and I go, whoa, some unladylike behavior has been going on in here. It usually looks like some sort of, I don't know, wild paper fiesta kind of event. The first thing that sometimes greets me is that trash can just overflowing with barely used paper towels. It looks a lot like that popcorn flowing out at the movie theater, except now it's down on the floor. And then I enter the stall, and in the stall there's all that little confetti now, confetti on the floor. And I'm going, so I've thought this over, and the confetti really has to do again with gravity and also with technology. In order to eliminate having to replace rolls often, we now have those truck tire sized toilet paper rolls, the ones they lift into place with the forklift. And because they're so large, gravity's at work, they don't really roll easily. So instead of getting something you can use, you get that little confetti thing. Now, I don't think you ought to put it on the floor, but that's what people do, because I know what goes on the floor is not going to levitate, it's not going to come back up, it's going to stay there. Then there's the Ferris wheel style, and that's the one with the 4 rolls. And again, it looks like a good solution, but you often find yourself snaking your hand up there trying to find the end of that thing, and if you don't get it right, you're making more confetti. Now there's a newer one that I kind of like, and it's sort of a mid-range size, and it rolls really easily on the spindle, and it tends to make these long streamers. Well, the reason it makes the streamers is it takes 2 motions for that one. You have to roll it out, and then it's got a kind of a guillotine thing that you gotta razor it up to cut the piece off, but some people, I guess, just streamer away. Meanwhile, we have the great new technology of the automatically flushing toilet. Now, I've talked to men, so this is not just about women. You put your bare butt down on there and the thing starts flushing before you've done anything. Not very pleasant. And there's another consequence of that automatically flushing thing. In the old days, there'd be these huge lines in the ladies' room, and there would be this nice sequence of events. You would hear a toilet flush, a door would open, and a lady would come out, and then you could go in. Now you're in your line, and there's actually a symphony of automatically flushing toilets. Has no relationship whatsoever to entrance or exit, so it becomes very confusing. Once you exit the stall, then you're faced with a whole bank of automatically operating systems for the water and the soap. I don't know, I wouldn't say men designed these, but whoever they didn't speak to each other. So every restroom you go into, it's different. So I find myself at times surreptitiously looking to the right or left to see what sort of motion actually activated the water so that you washed your hands. If there's no one around, I try some faux Tai Chi or maybe some hand wringing or occasionally yelling, which actually is not a movement. Eventually, you get the soap, you get the water, and then you're faced with this dispenser of either air or toilet paper. So there not toilet paper, hand towels. So I often find myself, there I am in a public space, trying to find the right movement that is going to create the response that I want from this machine. So I'm trying this, I'm trying that, and it's a little bit embarrassing because there I am trying to activate an inanimate object to reach its climax or its conclusion so that I can have a towel to wash my hands. Then once I get out of the restroom, often I'm faced with the query, what took you so long? Which is hard to explain. And that's it for me tonight, folks. I'm done.